start with the story of a patient that I saw who was referred to my clinic. He came in, was referred for anxiety. I didn't really know what was going on, but I could see immediately when he walked in the door to my office that there was something wrong. He was visibly shaking. This gentleman described how he had become so afraid of driving on the highway that he could barely leave his house to drive. And even driving a few miles to my office was tremendously anxiety-provoking for him. He said, I feel like I'm driving in this huge speeding bullet. And he had no idea how to work with it. As we talked more, I realized that he met all the criteria for not only panic disorder, but also generalized anxiety disorder. And on top of that, I could just see from his appearance that there was something else going on. He was 180 pounds overweight. He was severely overweight. So what is the standard, treatment dictum for something like this? Oh, take some medications, just lose some weight. Well, how long have these approaches actually worked for us? These, clinic-based, and I'm a clinician, I'm not knocking clinicians, but when we think, oh, here's what might be good for you, and we're not actually taking you into perspective. Well, if this is any indication, this is a graph of the obesity rates over the last 30 years, and purple is not good. So something's not working. And what I would suggest is that there might actually be something in terms of really understanding the individual that we might have been overlooking for a long time. And that's what I'll talk about today. How many of you recognize this guy? Maybe the pigeons give it away. So this is B.F. Skinner. He was very interested in understanding how animals behave, what drives behavior. In fact, he found that he could teach a pigeon to win a cross-court shot in ping pong for a food reward. There's the food reward. And what he was describing, he called this operant conditioning or positive and negative reinforcement. What he was describing was this very old evolutionarily conserved process that has three components: a trigger, a behavior, and a reward. If we can go back to my last slide. So we see some food, we eat the food, that's the behavior, and then our stomach sends this dopamine signal to our brain that says, remember what you ate and where you found it. In fact, this process has been shown to be evolutionarily conserved all the way back to the sea slug. Performs basically the same behavior. Eric Kandel got the Nobel Prize in the year 2000 showing that this is the case. That sea slugs, only 20,000 neurons, learn many of their core behaviors in the same way that humans do. So, very old, very conserved process, and scientifically reproduced over and over and over. Now, in college, I learned about operant conditioning. Many of you probably have as well. But when I became a young clinician, I didn't really think much of it, because I had learned in medical school, well, just if your patients are trying to lose weight, just make sure they eat salad instead of cake or whatnot. And what occurred to me as I was struggling to help my patients really change their addictive behaviors was that there was something that this operant conditioning process was saying to us that we were missing. This could actually describe so much of behavior beyond general addictions in our everyday world. So for example, we learn to eat cake not when we're hungry, but when we're anxious or when we're stressed. We learn to take pills to numb our emotional and our physical pain. We learn to look at cute pictures of puppies on Instagram when we're bored. In fact, social media is designed for the likes and the retweets. Food is engineered to be addictive. So of course, this is going to be really challenging to work with. So what do we do? Well, in medical school, I learned the simple formula, calories out versus calories in. Make sure you have more calories going out than going in, and you'll lose weight, which is an accurate formula. But it's not how my patients work. They don't just check their formula. I was taught in residency to help my patients set a quit date for 2 weeks out, give them some medications to help them with the withdrawal, and then quit smoking, right? This is where you all know this stuff, especially those of you trying to really help people cut down on nicotine dependence. So all of this depends on our willpower. Just grit, make sure you quit smoking, make sure you eat salad instead of cake. The problem is this depends on the prefrontal cortex, the weakest and youngest part of our brain from an evolutionary perspective. So of course we're going to struggle with this. Of course it's going to be really challenging to help people change behavior. So if this is so weak, why not rely on the strongest part of our brain? Is there some way that we could actually tap into this reward-based learning system in the process? And what I would suggest is that we can actually do that. And the ingredient that we need for that is awareness. What I would suggest is that awareness trumps self-control. Awareness trumps self-control. Now, that might seem like a lot to digest, so let's go through a little bit of neuroscience that explains how this works. There's a part of our brain called the orbitofrontal cortex, okay? This part of the brain is involved in determining reward value and holding that reward value so that we can make decisions easily and quickly. So for example, if I eat some broccoli and then I eat some milk chocolate, to my brain, the milk chocolate is more rewarding because it's going to have more calories. If I eat some dark chocolate, for me, the dark chocolate has that higher reward value. And so my brain sets up this hierarchy that says dark chocolate, milk chocolate, broccoli. I think of this part of the brain as the BBO part of the brain. It's always looking for that bigger, better offer. So what does this have to do with awareness? Well, this question of is awareness enough to change behavior really fascinated me. It actually got me really thinking, to the point where I shifted my career from molecular biology to becoming a cognitive neuroscientist, to even forming a startup company to see if we could really answer this single question: is awareness enough to change behavior? And we asked a simple question. We started developing mindfulness training apps to see if we could train people in awareness in their own context. Not in my office, because people don't learn to smoke in my office, not in some clinical setting, but actually in their own direct life, because that's how all of this process is set up. It's set up so we learn something in context. So what did we find? We use these app-based mindfulness training programs to pay attention to their behaviors in context. What do we see? Pay attention when you smoke cigarettes. What happens? The reward value drops. Pay attention when you're overeating or stress eating. What happens? The reward value drops. Now, as this reward value drops, it opens up that space for our brain to look for that baby O, to look for that bigger, better offer. Now, what I would also suggest is that awareness itself might even be that bigger, better offer. Here's an example from someone using our anxiety program. She wrote in her journal, "When I first started the program, I didn't quite buy into the benefits of curiosity. Today, I felt a wave of panic, and instead of immediate dread or fear, my automatic response was, that's interesting. That took the wind right out of its sails. I wasn't just saying it was interesting, I actually felt it." So you can see how even curiosity itself might be that bigger, better offer. Dr. Ellis was talking about fear and moving beyond fear. I love this quote. There's a woman, Dorothy Parker, who said that curiosity will conquer fear even more than bravery will. Curiosity will conquer fear even more than bravery will. And we're seeing it right here with this person. Now, stories can be illustrative, but data are more definitive. So we went on to do the research. Here's an example of a study that was led by Ashley Mason at UCSF, looking to see if app-based mindfulness training could actually change behavior. What did she find? 40% reduction in craving-related eating, a 35% reduction in eating to cope with negative emotions. So people are actually tapping right into that same process, that same learning process where they were learning to eat out of fear or boredom or sadness or whatever, self-judgment, and were able to step out of it. Here's another example. This is a study of anxious physicians. Unfortunately, this was the easiest study I ever recruited for. It took a single email from the CEO of our medical system because there were so many anxious physicians out there. What we found was there was a 57% reduction in anxiety with this mindfulness training, and we even found that there was a 50% reduction in certain aspects of burnout, even though we didn't train them or even mention the word burnout in the training at all. As they learned their mindfulness skills, they were able to generalize these things, and anxiety and certain aspects of burnout are highly correlated. Now, this was an interesting study, but it was a single-arm trial, so we went on and just finished a randomized controlled trial. It was funded by the NIH in people with generalized anxiety disorder. And what we found was that there was a 63% reduction in anxiety within 2 months of people using this app-based mindfulness training. Now, I show this number up here. It's called number needed to treat. This kind of gives us a sense for how efficacious the treatment is. Our best medications out there for anxiety, the number needed to treat is about 5.15, meaning you need to treat 5 people, and then 1 person is going to benefit from that treatment. With training people to actually become aware of their own experience and work with it, we only need to treat 1.6 people to treat them down to remission, where they have minimal symptoms. Now, we didn't stop there. We said, well, what's actually going on in the brain? How can we link this up with brain mechanisms? And this was a study we published a number of years ago, but when we looked at experience versus novice meditators, we found that there was a network of brain regions called the default mode network that was deactivated in experienced meditators. Now, this same network gets activated, in particular the posterior cingulate cortex. It gets activated when we get caught up in anxiety, when we get caught up in rumination with depression, when we get caught up in cravings from cigarettes to cocaine to even pathological gambling. And yet, with mindfulness training, people can learn to let go, and with this, we see a reduction in brain activity. We actually had somebody come in and test this out on camera. I'm going to show you a short video from Anderson Cooper when he came in to do a segment for 60 Minutes to actually see what his brain activity was doing as he was going through this process. Let's see if this video works. This is just the next generation of exercise. We've got the physical, exercise components down, and now it's about working out how can we actually train our minds.
Dr. Brewer is trying to understand how mindfulness can alter the functioning of the brain. He uses a cap lined with 128 electrodes.
We're going to start filling each of these 128 wells with conduction gel.
The electrodes are able to pick up signals from the posterior cingulate, part of a brain network linked to memory and emotion.
This is all just picking up electrical signal from the top of your head.
Since attending the mindfulness retreat, I'd been meditating daily and was curious to see if it had an impact on my brain.
We're going to have you start with thinking of something that was very anxiety-provoking for you.
Okay.
When I thought about something stressful, the cells in my brain's posterior cingulate immediately started firing, shown by the red lines that went off the chart on the computer screen.
Just drop into meditation.
Okay.
When I let go of those stressful thoughts and refocused on my breath, within seconds the brain cells that had been firing quieted down, shown by the blue lines on the computer.
That's really fascinating to see like that.
Dr. Brewer believes everyone can train their brains to reach that blue mindfulness zone, but he says all the technology we're surrounded by makes it difficult.
So the best part of that experiment was that Anderson Cooper came in, we gooped his head up with all this EEG gel for about 2 or 3 hours, and he pulled the cap off and he did something, and his hair was perfect. That's magic. But as we start to bring this together, as we learn more about how these brain mechanisms line up with the behavioral mechanisms, we can start to bring these together. So we just published a study in which we brought in people who wanted to quit smoking. And we showed them pictures of people smoking versus neutral pictures, and we scanned their brains at the same time so we could look at their brain activity, in particular focusing in on the posterior cingulate cortex. Then we could randomize them to get app-based mindfulness training program or the National Cancer Institute's Quit Guide app. A month later, we could bring them back in, scan their brains again, and see what predicted outcomes. Here's what we found. We found that there's a very, very strong correlation between a reduction in brain activity in the posterior cingulate cortex and a reduction in cigarettes. Yet this was specific to the mindfulness training group. As you can see here, there was a strong correlation where there was no correlation in the NCI app. In fact, we found a dose-dependent relationship. The more modules people completed in the mindfulness training app, the better they did. Yet the folks in the control group did the same number of modules, but showed no correlation between the amount of time that they used the app and their outcomes. So what this said to us was we could actually bring together a theory. If we could understand how the mind works, we could then target those specific behavioral mechanisms with app-based mindfulness training program. And then we could link those up with brain mechanisms to show that we can actually predict clinical outcomes by bringing all of these things together. So just to bring this to a close, what this would suggest is that we actually do know a whole lot about how the mind works. We do know a whole lot about how our behavior works. But we're not paying enough attention to that on the individual level. Reward-based learning is the strongest learning process known in science, yet we're not focusing on that. We can see how this applies to all sorts of different behaviors, from smoking to eating to even anxiety. And yet, as we bring in these eating or taking pills or distracting ourselves, how these provide only temporary relief. They don't actually dismantle the core loop itself. What we also know is that we can bring awareness in. As we train people to become curious about their own experience, they can learn to substitute that curiosity for that old behavior so that it itself becomes that bigger, better offer, and they naturally gravitate toward it. It becomes their new habit. So I'll just end by telling you a little bit about how my patient did. 2 weeks after, so when he first came in for his initial evaluation with me, and we both agreed that he had a lot of anxiety. That was pretty straightforward. I sent him home just with our anxiety app and said, well, just start mapping out your habit loops. See what you notice. He said, okay, I can do that. He came back 2 weeks later with a big smile on his face. He couldn't wait to tell me what he discovered. And what he told me, he said, I lost 14 pounds. And I looked really confused. I said, I thought we were focusing on anxiety. And he said, yeah, I realized, I eat as a way to cope with my anxiety, and it doesn't actually help, so I stopped doing that. Over the course of 6 months, he lost 97 pounds, and he's still on a roll. He still wants to lose more. He had hypertension. His blood pressure is back to normal. He had a fatty liver because of his eating behavior. That is back to normal. And I think it was about 3 or 4 months, no, it was probably 5 months after he started treatment with me. I was walking out of our School of Public Health one day. It's on a busy street in Providence, Rhode Island. And this guy drives up to the curb, rolls down his window, and it's my patient. He goes, hey, Dr. Jud. And I looked confused again. And he said, oh, I'm an Uber driver now. I'm on my way to the airport. So this is an example of how, if we actually know how our minds work, instead of pushing on the wall or trying to push through a locked door, we can actually find the key, open it, and walk through. So I'll end with these 3 simple instructions from the wonderful poet who died last year, Mary Oliver. And hope that you too might be curious about how this can help you move to help motivate behavior change. Thank you very much.